Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone for joining us for today's webinar, Creating a Healthcare Cybersecurity Battle Plan. I'm David Ellington, and before we get started here, I just want to give you a few housekeeping items. We are going to have time for questions, a few questions at the end of this webcast. If you would please put your questions, type your questions into the box on the GoToWebinar panel in the question section there, and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end of the webcast. Also, we invite everyone please to hang on until the end of the webcast, as we have a very cool giveaway to hand out at that time. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce our today's speakers. Joining us today, we have John Chrisley. He is the Global CISO of Neturian and Event Tracker, and also Carl Norris, who is the CTO of DuoLark. These gentlemen will inform you of everything you need to know to create a healthcare cybersecurity plan. And without further ado, I will turn it over to John.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy that you could join us today. I want to get started with just a little bit about Neturian, and then I'll introduce myself a little better, and then Carl will introduce himself and his firm. Just want to talk a little bit about Neturian, and you'll hear a little bit more about Event Tracker throughout the webinar as well. Neturian and Event Tracker have now merged into one firm, and we are a managed security provider. We provide both managed firewalls and managed endpoint protection solutions, and a little bit of everything in between. We manage not only the network security of the customers we service, but also their wireless, and we also help them out with PCI and HIPAA compliance matters along with some of those offerings. Moving on to a little bit about myself, I am the global CISO for both Neturian and Event Tracker. I've been in the business for quite a few years, and I've got probably about a dozen years specific to healthcare before I've moved into the environment that I'm in now. So I've been both on the payer and the provider side, as well as the academic medical side, all servicing the cybersecurity needs of those firms that I work for. I'm constantly training and certifying, trying to keep up to date with the latest advances, not only in the industry and what's going on with EMR and EHRs, but also the cybersecurity threats and what could cause outages to a healthcare entity, and what we can all do to try to protect each other and protect our customers against those outage issues. I'm going to turn it over to Carl so he can introduce himself and his firm, DuoLark. Carl?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carl Norris. I am the founder and Chief Technical Officer for DuoLark. DuoLark was formed to really look closely at protecting the data assets inside of healthcare. What we basically do is complement what Neturian does from the aspect of they deal with a lot of the infrastructure issues and security issues, and we deal with looking at the data. Together, we make sure that all the pieces fit into place to make sure that folks are safe, their records are safe, their data is safe, and their operations are safe. So John, I'm going to let you continue on.
Great. So we're going to go over a quick agenda for today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about how big is the problem in healthcare and answer some of the questions about, what happens if my organization is breached? And most importantly, how can I help? That means you. How can I help to increase security? Everybody has a part to play, and so hopefully we'll give you some tips that will help you keep your organization and yourself more secure. We will get technical. There's a couple of slides where we do talk some technical solutions and so forth. And we'll talk about next steps and how you can sort of get started right away, and we'll go from there. Carl?
Sure. The first thing that we recognize is the hectic schedules that folks have inside of healthcare, because there's constantly something going on and something to worry about. And the technology part of it is always a challenge, and it needs to be reduced and streamlined so that folks can pay attention to the patients and to the healthcare business itself. So what we do is we try, both of us, Neturian and DuoLark, try to make sure that folks can work with inside their businesses and their operations and ensure that you're generating the revenue that's needed. So the revenue cycle management, should be uninterrupted and continues. When it comes to GRC, the regulatory portion of this, the compliance issues, how the rules are all put together, not only do we check the boxes, but we try to make sure that it gets incorporated into the business process and the business operations so that functionally you have a business continuity and disaster recovery should you need it. Protecting personal identifiable information is critical to everything that we do. It's incorporated into everything we do, and we understand that everybody is briefed on this, they know this, they've been trained on this. It's taking it to the next level in the future, making sure that you have validated, not just trustworthy data, so that when you come down to protecting the health information inside the records, that is essentially being monitored and maintained so that the data can be trusted when it's used. Brand protection, a lot of times isn't really discussed much in healthcare, but it's critical because if there is an issue with what happens inside the practice, then it flows down and impacts how patients look at the docs and the institutions and all of the continuum of healthcare and the continuum of care within inside of it. So protecting against hacking and cyber threats is essential because it happens every day. More and more, the numbers are not going down. So we're trying to help folks understand what they can do to protect themselves. John?
So let's talk a moment about how, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you start looking at the data breaches, because the numbers aren't really going down, there were more than 1,500 unique data breaches by the end of 2016. 500, and a data breach really means that there's 500 or more individuals impacted per breach. So when we start to look at this and we see what's going on, we actually break this down into a numbers environment. So inside the numbers themselves, you can look at, it costs $1 to do this right, to enter the record correctly. To go in and audit the data to make sure that it's correct and find the errors and correct the data, it costs about $10 a record. But to get caught either in an audit or a breach or issues that impact the operation overall, it costs over $100 per record to address those issues. So for a small investment, it has a great payoff. John?
Great, Carl. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about some of the danger areas and what can happen. Now, some of this may seem, familiar to some of you, and some may not. The statistics show that about 50% of all security breaches occur due to an inside job. And what does that mean? Well, there's always a disgruntled employees. They're mad about something. They're upset. They didn't get the raise that they wanted. They didn't get the promotion, or something happened. Something didn't go their way, and now they're disgruntled. They could do real damage inside an organization, especially if the issue is not found early. There's a lot of concern around privacy monitoring, not only in healthcare, but every company. And so the inability to properly watch for behavioral as it deals with email and web activity and even social, you may not see what's going on in somebody's mind until it's way too late. And they could do really bad things to your data and to your network and really set your systems up for failure if you don't catch it ahead of time. Obviously, the lack of a properly managed security plan and firewall could really hurt your organization. It's one thing to have a firewall. Most companies do. But if it hasn't been updated in years or audited ever, and if nobody's watching, then that can really be a problem for your organization. And hackers could get in, and disgruntled employees could get data out, and you may not even know that it's going on. Failover and downtime. So the lack of a proper failover strategy, as Carl mentioned, business continuity, even on the technical side, can mean downtime for your organization. Now, if you run a small practice or even a medium to larger size practice or physician group, even within the hospitals, you got to think to yourself, what would I do if I didn't have the computers? Now, some people think, well, that would be great. But just think about how much data entry now is not only available but required to be done electronic, how much these records have to be electronic now, And so if you had to go a day or two without the computer, no email, no chart lookups, no history lookups, no blood test results from the labs, how would you operate if there was downtime? And then the last piece is an accidental download by an employee. And we'll talk more about this as we get into some technical discussions further on. You know, sometimes people don't mean to have an accident, right? I think that's ingrained in that word accident, right? It's an accident. But a lot of things are downloads. They either click on an email that they shouldn't have clicked on that item, or they bring in a file from home on a USB stick. There's many ways, but accidents. And those accidents can cause severe damage inside a corporate network, and they could be very hard to recover from if you're not planning for them ahead of time. We'll talk about some of the reality here. So anyone in healthcare has got to be aware of now of HIPAA, enacted in 1996, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. There's some mandates that it provides, but the important piece is it doesn't tell you exactly how to do it. It really leaves that up to the judgment of the business or the person installing the EMR or securing the EMR. And because it's not specific, there's a lot of room for wiggle in these rules, and they're really supposed to be just guiding principles, and you're supposed to know what the right thing is to do. But it does take knowledge and expertise to develop a good security plan, and not only that, it takes ongoing maintenance. It's not one time set it and forget it. Okay, a lot of things around security have to be managed and babysat and monitored 24/7, 365, because all it takes is for something to get through or something to be missed, and you're going to have catastrophic damage done to your organization. You may not find out until it's way too late. Okay? Moving on, let's talk about some of the major threats to the organization around cybersecurity. Malware and viruses, okay? They're constantly evolving. They take different shapes, they take different forms, and the predators out in the world, the hackers, the people that want to steal the data, they're getting very advanced in their techniques, okay? Today you may get an email from your bank or from a bank asking you to log in and verify your credentials, and yet if you stand back and think for a minute, you may think, wow, I've never been emailed by that bank before. I don't even have an account there. Or maybe they're asking you to make a donation to this specific charity via a website, and you have no idea how they got your email. Or they ask you to log into your PayPal, and you don't use PayPal. These are just very basic examples, but I can tell you that it happens all the time where a corporation, whether you're 5 employees, 500, 5,000, or 50,000, a set of emails sent into an organization is usually going to have some success in having people click on the links. I used to say when it came to malware that if I really wanted to infect a company, I could send a virus as an attachment, and the subject would be, do not click me. And somebody inevitably will click that attachment, and you know, the trick worked. Another major threat is having a lack of managed cybersecurity services. So again, I mentioned there are organizations that have firewalls, they have antivirus, they do certain things, but they don't cover any more bases than that, and they don't know how well those protections are really protecting the environment. And what you really want to think about is, where is the sensitive data in your organization? Sure, in healthcare, it's going to be in the EMR and the EHR. It's going to be in the payroll system. But where else is your sensitive data? If you just look around, you look around your own computer, you think about your organization, a lot of companies forget that a major amount of sensitive information ends up in their email system. Like it or not, it usually does. And you also want to look at external hard drives and USB sticks and things like that. You need to find out where that sensitive data is and how it's being protected. And if you don't have a managed service provider helping you with that, it's going to be very difficult. And the same thing goes for the monitored security controls. It's one thing to manage it and have it outsourced. It's another thing to even have it monitored. Do you know who is trying to break in and get to your data? Or worse yet, do you know if somebody within your corporation is stealing data little by little under your nose, and you may never know because who's looking for that, right? You always want to trust your internal employees. It's okay to trust, but you do need to think about verifying who's got access to the data and what's happening with it. All right, let's talk about some statistics out there around external and internal hacking. So external hacking currently in the world represents 47% of all breaches. I do want to make a comment here. These statistics, they usually come from either Verizon data breach reports or other reports that are out in the world, and these are only based on breaches that are reported and known. Usually when law enforcement gets involved or a forensic investigator gets involved, this information bubble up and get reported. So 47% come from external, 25% you can see is internal. It's very unfortunate that those numbers are way too close together. Okay, they're way too close together. That means you have to be watching the internal issues as well as the external. From an external side, we talked about constantly monitoring the firewall and being able to detect and report on breach attempts. All it takes is one. You don't know if somebody got in and they were able to take a record, or were they able to take 1,500 records or 15,000 records, and how do you know? Internally, you have to have, I know Carl will talk about this later, watch the watcher. Who's watching the watchers? That means who's watching the people that have access to these sensitive data systems, also who's watching IT. IT usually has keys to the entire kingdom. Your database administrators have access to all the databases. Your developers, your analysts within healthcare, your reporting analysts, they usually have access to all the data. And who's watching them? Are they being monitored at all? There are ways to do it, and if you're not doing it, then you could end up being in the front headlines of the newspaper when it's way too late. All right, let's talk about quickly sort of the cost of a breach. And obviously, there is cost that happens when a breach occurs. There's almost no way to get around it. There's lots of impacts, and I'll almost start from right to left here. Breach notification. So the rules are nowadays that if you have a breach, in some states it could be one record. In some rules it's 500 records. But nowadays the rules are getting such that if you have a breach of as little as one record, you have to notify. Okay, and I'm okay with this from a holistic security perspective because I'm also a patient, right? I'm an individual. If my information is breached in an organization, I expect that they're going to do the right thing and notify me. There's costs to notifying people. There's usually the cost of phone calls and mail services and credit monitoring having to be offered. So there is a hard cost. Now there's other costs and impacts as well, right? There's usually an investigation that has to go on. And you may have to bring in an outside forensic specialist to do that. I did a lot of that in my career. Forensic specialists who are really good, they cost about as much as attorneys, and they bill about the same way. There's also a public impact perception, or what we like to call brand reputation, brand impact. Do people want to come to your organization after they've just read in the newspaper that you had a breach? How do they perceive that you're going to protect their data going forward? You could lose your ability. It says loss of license here, or loss of a franchisee agreement. You could lose your ability to do business. I've seen reports of a few businesses where the cost and impact of a breach was so much that that company had to just shut its doors and go out of business. That's a real impact. Okay. Obviously, there are costs if you need to upgrade your infrastructure or buy new solutions that you didn't have in place before. Okay. And then there's fines and penalties that could come from anywhere from OCR to the DOJ. It's hard to say where things could come from. Okay. All right, moving on, let's talk about some of what's been reported in the news or in some of the reports about the numbers. And you'll see these numbers often. I think it's important, though, to just keep reiterating. The average out in the world today is about $200 per patient record that is breached, is about the average. Now, that doesn't necessarily take into cost all the numbers. How much time does it take internally with your lawyers, with the forensic people? It's just an average cost, but it's going to be different based on your situation and based on what you have to go through. Okay, and remember that a breach, it doesn't just have to impact 1 or 15 or 1,500 records. It could impact thousands. If, for example, you were to make a copy of your EHR database and put it on an external hard drive, you wanted to take it home and do some number crunching and you know, some reporting, and somebody were to get a hold of that external hard drive and you didn't keep that data encrypted, or you forgot where you left that external hard drive. These are just examples, but these are real examples from the past that have actually happened to organizations. So a data breach can really impact thousands of records at one time. And we've already talked about the notification requirements and the brand reputation hits that you could take. Carl? I apologize. It sounds like we're having some issues hearing Carl. I'm going to talk through his slide and give him a minute maybe to drop and call back in. Apologize for that. So let's talk about the barriers to safety on an EMR and an EHR. So in the EMR, human error in data entry is a real problem. So when you're putting a patient into your registration system, when they come to your facility, they come to your hospital, they come to your office, the first time that you get to put their data in a system is the first time you can make an error in doing the data entry. You type in their name wrong, you type in their social wrong, their address wrong. Something you type in is wrong, and if it's not validated by somebody, then it can take way too long for that data entry error to have been found. Okay, there's too many companies out there that think this is not going to happen to us. We're too good. We've got our stuff in place. It simply will not happen to our practice. Carl and Carl's company can tell you, as he audits clinical data systems, everybody has errors in their data. It's almost impossible to not have errors. Okay? There are companies that keep their passwords the same and don't change them because why? Well, it's not convenient. Changing passwords is hard. Remembering a new password every 90 days is difficult and cumbersome, and that's why they don't do it. So sometimes, as audits have found, passwords remain out of compliance for years, not just months, not just 1 year, but several years, and that's real bad to the security of a system. And last, the data protection is not considered as part of an overall design. So when you're putting in your EMR, you're putting in your billing system, you're putting in your other systems, maybe security is not at the forefront of what you're thinking. You're thinking about how to get that system in place, how to start making money, how to start seeing patients. We got a clinic that's open or a hospital that's open. And if security is not baked into the process up front at that time, well, it can be really hard to go back later and have to retrofit a system with the right security controls.
Hey, John, I'm back.
Good, Carl. You're up next. Go ahead. Thank you for coming back.
You know what? It's always nice to have a failover. So this was a real-time failover. So the systems went down and had to use a different system to log in and talk to you all. So thanks for understanding. And it just, you know, it shows that we do implement these for a reason. So the next part of this is really, you know, implementing a defensive threat solution. John, this is you, right?
Yeah, I can talk to this. So what I want to talk about is, you know, and Carl said a defensive threat solution. You got to think about what is there more than just a firewall. Here at Neturian and Event Tracker, we offer more than just a firewall. That's just one piece of what we do. We do it very well, and we do it for thousands upon thousands of customers today. But we do more than just a firewall. So, and what we do is we offer a managed firewall, so we don't just set it and forget it. We actually manage that firewall. We watch to make sure that it's up, and if it's down, we let somebody know, and we want somebody to get on that. We let people know if the firewall has been bypassed, okay? And we're able to see traffic going through the firewall. And so if the data is not going through the firewall, we know something happened. Maybe somebody unplugged the firewall because they didn't like that they couldn't get out to YouTube like you didn't want them to, as an example. But we also now, we offer a managed SIM, so Security Event Information Management. where we actually will watch the endpoint device for threats. And what do I mean by that? Well, we actually have software that goes on the computers, right? The front office computers in healthcare, these would be the registration desks, where people are taking the credit card numbers and the Social Security numbers and scanning the patient's data all day long. We have software that goes right on those computers. We also have the same piece of software goes on the back office computers, can go on the servers, and we can also get alerts and data from your network devices, your routers and your switches and your wireless and your antivirus, and all sorts of systems we can watch to see what's going on and where are the threats. Now, this SIM system is fed by state-of-the-art multiple threat sources from the internet, some public, some paid subscriptions, so that we get threat intel globally, what's going on globally, so we can keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world and try to keep our customers safer from what's going on in the world. And we can also do, and we do this quite often, especially in regulated environments, vulnerability assessments and penetration testing. And there is a difference between vulnerability assessments and pen testing. The simple way I explain this is vulnerability assessment will check and see what vulnerabilities exist. Maybe there's software that's not up to date, maybe there's open ports or holes in a network, but it doesn't go as far as to try to exploit them. Whereas a pen test will, if it's scoped out right, will try to break in and get to that sensitive data. We'll try to get to an EMR and try to break in and see if we can get to a patient record and show you how we got in. Or maybe it gets into an employee database and shows you their rate of pay because we were able to break all the way in. And so it's a paid, these are paid engagements to allow us to show you where the holes exist in an effort to show you how these can be fixed and patched to make you more secure. Very important that you have this done. Most regulations mandate that this happen at least once a year. If you're smart, you're doing some sort of an assessment quarterly because things change. Carl?
Yes, thank you. So when monitoring the network and you're monitoring the sensitive data, it's also important that from time to time you audit the data to make sure that it's trustworthy and valid. A lot of what we have designed at DualArc is to do more than just that. It is a data reconciliation engine at its heart. And what we do is we validate the changes that have been made over time to the data that is being used. A lot of folks do not feel they can trust the data in their systems. They know it's good, they know that they're doing their best, but there's always a double check. And we can do that from the aspect of digitally monitoring it. Tie that into what NetSurian and Event Tracker are doing on the monitoring side, and you can actually see some of the monitoring in the future of how this can seamlessly work together. That's where we're going with this, and that's why NetSurian and DualArc are on the phone today, is that we complement one another in areas to complete a solution for the end user. So when we start looking at data entry by humans leading to mistakes, we try to reduce that risk to the patient. We try to uncover billing issues that can impact being reimbursed for. We have actually improved first pass reimbursement significantly to the point that some of the providers and some of the reimbursement companies within RCM are actually giving folks an extra 2 points to be able to utilize valid data because they don't have to do as much work on their side. And it becomes a reputation that practices are providing quality information. They understand what's what. Improving quality measurement reports that you have to send back to the government. Knowing who the patient is and only having one record, regardless of the naming conventions that they may have, becomes extremely important, and that's where we start to play together and do really well to improve the way the practice and systems work. We monitor logs and activities so that we spot suspicious behavior. It gets reported, and then it can be addressed. We provide the prioritization of remediation solutions so we can find what record is the best record to use, and then what records need to be remediated, repaired, fixed, so that they become very trustworthy. And then we can also spot records that probably should be removed completely, which means that over time, the records inside the EHR and EMR become more and more valuable. most importantly, we also protect the physician in the operational use of the MPI codes. And that way we can ensure that the doctors are protected, which sometimes goes unnoticed, but physicians are responsible for their MPIs, and what we try to do is to ensure that there is a match between the MPI and the record so that when it's reported it's not duplicated or entered in error by someone else, and then the doctor's responsible. So these are things that we do at DualArc to make practices better. John?
Great, Carl. Thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit about how a SIM can help safeguard patient records. So we basically break this down into 4 blocks, if you will: predicting, preventing, detecting, and responding. So part of our solution is around predicting what's going to happen, so anticipating new attack types, proactively prioritize and addressing them. We want to sort of get ahead of things that are going on in the world. If we have an idea of where sensitive data is and systems that should be protected, we want to make sure that we get ahead of that so that our customers don't have to worry about it if we can. The second part is preventing attacks. So again, I talked about vulnerability scanning, safe listing, whitelisting, blacklisting. We do a lot of work in trying to prevent attacks from ever getting through. Now, we have sort of like a doctor would prescribe a medicine or a treatment to a patient. We have a solution that we sort of prescribe to our customers. We call it a best practice implementation, and customers that will allow us to implement our best practices are much safer than those that don't. As with any solution, if you go poking holes into it and turning off the controls that are there to protect you, you're going to have a lesser secure solution. The other part of the solution that we have is to detect. We look at threats that are going on the computers and from the network, and also we do behavioral analysis. And again, this is a sort of a new concept in the information security world, but not new at all to investigative principles, looking at the behavior of what's going on. So you could get a report that says, well, Nurse Nancy logged in via the VPN at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, 3 a.m. You could say, well, so what? Well, number one, does Nurse Nancy ever log in via the VPN on the weekend? Does she ever have a need? This is behavior. This is stuff that indicates there might be something more to look at. And the more our system is in place, it learns. We learn with our customers, and we learn what is normal. And we're able to then detect what's going on outside the norm and alert. And so responding to issues is the last piece. We're able to provide our customers with the ability to basically do a forensic analysis to determine what's going on. So if we see something happen, we have all the logs. They're safe and secure. They're in our cloud. They're not nobody can delete them. And we're able to take a look and see from cradle to grave what's going on. And our service, our managed service, will analyze and monitor this 24/7 if needed for a customer to make sure that they're as secure as possible. Carl?
Yes. When you start to look at meeting the HIPAA PCI environments, John, you want me to address this?
Yes, Carl.
Okay, great. When you really start to look at meeting the HIPAA and PCI environments, knowing what you want to protect and where it is critical. So when you start to audit, you look at the inventory, you look at what are the assets inside the scope of the audit, how do you configure that audit for settings and relevant logging so that you pick up not only the devices that you see, but the devices that get logged on. Then you collect that information and record it into specific security events so that you can see how the events correlate. In using a SIM, you can generally see things that you don't see with the human eye. And you pick it up from lots of different places over time, which begins to give you the behavior that John was talking about earlier. When you begin to organize these so that you can see them for review, things begin to really start to be discovered. Once it's discovered, then you can prioritize what you need to really pay attention to. So you can annotate it and then say, okay, how frequently does this happen? What is the risk? A lot of it comes down to valuation on the threat and what the threat is, because some areas inside the network are going to be more valuable than others, and that way you can prioritize where you want to focus your solution. Maintaining the information should something happen is critical, and that's where the logging comes in, because if an auditor comes in and they see that you know what you're doing, it makes everything a little easier. If they see improvement, it makes things a little easier. If you do find something going on and you have to disclose it, there's ways that you can disclose issues to really prepare yourself. So there's always the False Claims Act, and knowing what's going on with it so that you can report and say, oops, we've made a mistake, we need to make it right. At that point in time, you normally get a break so that it's not as much of a penalty if you find it yourself and report it versus someone else who finds it and reports it. So being able to understand how the reports work, how to utilize the reports, and how to use the audits for the reports becomes essential. John?
Great, thanks, Carl. So on this slide, and I won't go through every single item on this slide, I know there's a lot of text in a lot of areas, but what we want to show is again, all the different systems and things that are usually going on or could go on, depending on services purchased and so forth, that will help keep you more secure, but you've got to stay on top of them. So we've talked a lot about this. Some of these are things that we offer our customers to help them stay more secure. So I'll sort of pinpoint a few. On the very left-hand side at the bottom, you see unlimited log management. So you have to ask yourself today, where am I keeping the logs from my firewall, and how long am I keeping them? Now, as an example, Netshurian keeps the logs for all the firewalls we deploy for at least a year for every single firewall, so they're always available. Should a customer or an investigator need to come in and take a look at the logs, they're always there. Endpoint logs, we even keep longer than that. So if you're not doing that or you don't know where your logs are, that's a great service that somebody can do for you and help take that heavy burden, which is actually a regulatory requirement. If you take credit cards, PCI has it in there. It's something that we can do for you as a service. I'll take a look at the next column to the right, threat detection and response, and I'll look at the bottom, endpoint USB monitoring. So again, shutting down USB sticks from being used in an organization can be very difficult. That's very hard when sometimes you do need USB ports to be open for things like keyboards and mice and other devices to be plugged in, but that doesn't mean that somebody should be able to bring a USB stick or an external hard drive from home and steal all your data. So being able to have a whitelist of only certain corporate approved devices are able to be used is very important, but can be very difficult to do on your own. That's one of the things that we can help you with as well. I think we've talked a lot about most of the rest of the things on here, on this grid, but I do want to say that having vendors such as Netshurian, Event Tracker, and DualArc in place really helps cut through a lot of this. A lot of this we do automatically for you behind the scenes, and that is why we're here, is to help our customers get through a lot of this. Otherwise, how would you do this? How are you doing this? And are you sure? Okay. I want to talk about patching for a minute. Anyone that's seen me speak at other events, you know that I go back to the basics of holistic IT security, and patching is one of those real key areas that I still don't think, as an industry or as a profession of cybersecurity, we really have a handle on yet in most cases. When I do a lot of audits, people will say, well, I've got Windows updates turned on. Is that enough? And the answer is, well, that's a very good place to start, but that's not enough. There's other software on your computer besides Microsoft Windows, the operating system, or Microsoft Office. There's things like Adobe and Java and things like that. There's other third-party software, and these things all need to be kept up to date. Why? If not, there's holes that attackers and viruses can use to get in and get to your data. So it's very important to keep your system patched. I put something up here on the slide that says do not delay patching. So no more than 48 hours after patches are available. This can be very hard for some organizations, especially ones that don't have a lab where they can test out new software, or they don't have a procedure in place. They don't have a regular patching cycle and schedule set up. This can be very difficult for people to react quickly, but it's got to be done. Remember, a compromised system can hurt all the systems connected on that network. I put comment here. I've had people say, well, you know, a patch may break something. Well, sure, but what's the alternative? A breach? And what's going to cost more and hurt more? So it's very important to get a patching solution in place. There is no one-size-fits-all. I highly recommend that you find a way to keep all your systems up to date. If you have any questions, there'll be some contact information at the end of the slide deck. You'll be able to reach out, and one of us can help you get some more information on that. On the education piece, it's very important to make sure your users are part of your security solution. It's not all about the technical controls. Some of this is about end-user awareness. And since there's new threats discovered every single day, you've got to tell your users and you've got to educate them and make sure this not only goes for you at the office but at home as well. You've got to make sure people understand what they should and should not do from your computers, like setting really simple passwords or opening attachments or links from people in places they have no idea where it came from. Okay. Another thing at the very bottom is, whenever possible, you really should be using different passwords for different websites. For example, you know, if you use Facebook and you also do online banking, those two passwords should not be the same. It makes it too easy for an attacker to get into both. So think about that, especially at work, where you're entrusted with some really sensitive data on behalf of your patients and your customers. Make sure you use strong passwords, whether your employer requires you to or not. It's very good practice to make sure that you secure yourself and your operations as much as possible. That's just good practice. Carl?
Yes, thank you, John. Cybersecurity advisory services. This is where DualArc comes into play again to complete the NetSurian and Event Tracker solutions. We offer the ability to do independent validation and audits of the environments. So once they're in place, we can validate that it is compliant for PCI, it's compliant to HIPAA rules and requirements. We look further than that, and we look at the proactive business continuity. If something should happen, is everything in place so that it can be recovered and continue on? There's been a lot of issues with ransomware, and they're still going on. There are certain things that need to be done to ensure continuity and protection against these threats, and they will continue to morph because ransomware now has proven to be the most profitable malware ever released. So it's something to pay attention to, be aware of, because it's coming down from the hospitals to the larger practices to the smaller practices. Everyone is exposed, and it's important that folks understand how to deal with it when it happens, because it's pretty tricky and it can be completely avoided. Watch the watchers. That's where what NetSurian is doing and what DualArc does is very important. You guys may already have a firewall in place and not want to change it, but the nice thing about this is that you can actually put a small firewall in place that watches what everything is doing. So should something fail, your systems are still protected. Call it defense in depth, but it's a little bit more than that, because it actually allows you to see what's going on inside the network. And for those folks that need to make sure that everything is done correctly, it gives you that little extra benefit without a lot of costs to just make sure things work and are working and are safe and are secure. What this does is basically also give you the ability that if something should happen, and down in South Florida we're always worried about hurricanes, so we talk about that, but it's also if you're close to a train track and a train derails and you have to, leave the office and you can't go back for some time. Being able to watch what happens and work remotely, and if the IT team can't get in or something were to happen to someone on the IT team, Watch the Watcher would allow you to fail back over to what's going on. Another part of what happens with being able to put some of the systems in place from NetSurian is that when you look at the continuum of care and you get into bundled payments and you start looking at who's responsible if there's a breach and all the information is shared, if everyone is on a Watch the Watcher plan, then it gives everybody kind of a safety net. And when you start looking at cyber insurance, the cost of the cyber insurance could be reduced by having a better system in place. And these guys are really good at finding out and understanding the risk and avoidance of the costs. So experienced advice to prioritize the remediation once we start talking about all these details becomes very, very important to talk to the right people at the right time for the right solutions. We provide the defense in depth solution, as we talked about, with priorities. What this does is it ensures the ability to recover from a disaster, be it natural or something internal, or a failure unpredictable, or what happens next inside of cyber threats. So that's kind of what we try to offer to patients and to practices and to systems in the scope of security. Thanks, John.
Great. So in summary, we'll sort of summarize and we'll talk about some of the challenging environments that we all work in, right? And I'll take part of this slide and I'll let Carl take the bottom of the slide. So, you know, we all work, and some of us work in healthcare, some of us work in retail, some are government entities, you know, we're all over the place. So they are challenging environments. The amount of hackers that are out there trying to attack our businesses is exponentially rising. It's not going away. Regardless of how many hackers go to jail, there's always more to replace them. And so our brands are always under attack. It doesn't matter what the brand is, whether we are a government, whether we're a small entity, large entity. If you have systems that are connected to the internet in any way, which most everybody does, they have to be secured a proper way. I'll continue to say in every presentation I speak at that there's really only one way to do security. That is the right way. And if you're not doing it that way, well, you're leaving yourself open for hackers and others to attack. The real-world costs of these hack attacks include the brand damage, the cost of hackers hacking in. You may have to recover, rebuild systems, especially in the case of ransomware. There could be, you know, costs levied upon you by government entities or, you know, other firms. And so there's a lot of costs that go along with being attacked and successfully hacked, and data being siphoned off by a hacker or stolen or lost or misused by an internal person. Carl?
When we look at what we do, we look at the data essentially and the security that surrounds it. And what we're finding is that data is the new oil. When you're reporting quality measures and you're reporting reimbursement environments, all of that becomes how you make money. Being able, most importantly probably, is also being able to assure the patient that the information is correct that you have on them and that they can update that information. More and more you see patient portals becoming essential. If you look at how your finances work at the bank, a lot of folks think that their patient records should work very similar, and the reality is that it's still an emerging process. So data for practices becomes the new oil. The better it's secure, the better the accuracy is, the more people will talk about it, and that's where referrals come into play. Practices grow based on quality of care, and you know, the information accessibility is really essential to that. With that, we have found from doing audits with CPAs, and a lot of CPAs will come in and do an audit for a practice that's either being sold or acquired, that good systems increase the value of the practice by as much as 30%. So when you look at the investment that you've made, it's not just in IT, it's in the business valuation as well, which a lot of folks don't always calculate in. So John?
Sure. So we're coming to the end of the webinar, and I want you all to hang tight. We're going to have time for Q&A, and we're going to have time for the raffle at the end, but we do want to put some information up here. Both Carl and myself are available anytime to answer any questions or to discuss with you your particular situation and how we might be able to help. You'll see both Carl and I, our emails are up there. Carl's phone number is there if you'd like to give him a ring, or you can check out our websites or follow me on Twitter. We encourage you to do so. We're going to turn it over now to David and ask if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you, Carl, and thank you, John. We did have a couple of questions come in. Let me get started with the first one. I can pull it up. I know I have it here somewhere. There we go. What are your thoughts in regards to trusting vendors? Is there a best practice to ensure vendors are compliant?
Well, this is John. I'll take a first shot, and then I'll see if Carl has anything to add to it. You know, both of our companies, actually all three of our companies that we represent, between the two of us, we are vendor firms. But we've been customers. I've served as a CISO inside organizations for many years, and I've had to deal with a lot of vendors. You have to find a vendor you can trust and that you can work with. It's not always easy. And I think the better that you vet your vendors and really work with them and check their references and talk to people that have used them before, talk to people that know those vendors. I'll also say that you know, not all vendors are equal, and sometimes you'll think the vendor just by their name, they could have a really big brand name, but you get people within the vendor company that either you don't like or you can't work with. So you've got to pick vendors that you can work with, that understand your plight and your situation, and that can help you. And then you've got to form a trust. It goes both ways. You know, a vendor trusts you to pay your bills, and you need to find a vendor that will look out for your best interest and have your back and not embarrass you and really do what it is you need to have them brought in. Not always an easy thing to accomplish, but you need to do your homework and find a vendor you can trust. Carl?
Sure. You know, my background is accounting, and vendors are critical to the success of any business, and inside of healthcare more so, because things are beginning to change. More and more you see folks using outside vendors to store patient information, and the practice is dependent upon their capabilities. And you can have a BAA in place, a business associate agreement, so that you can define how the vendor performs. The tighter that agreement is, the better, for sure. The other side of that is that the vendor gives great value to the end user because it takes some of the responsibility off them and really lets the practice focus on the patient. And that's really what it's all about. When you start looking at the value of a vendor, it's incredibly important. When you look at the vendor security, it's also important that they understand the rules that they must abide by. And you know, it's evident that in some of the breaches, you know, it's been through third parties. And being able to ensure what happens with that becomes essential. As technology moves forward and you get into the Internet of Things, with, you know, being able to grab information off devices, what Event Tracker and NetSurian are offering is an extremely good value, because that is not really secure as much as people may think or feel. So having that defense in depth to protect how that information is being used through the Internet of Things is essential. Thanks, John.
Great. Carl, we have a follow-up question about DuraLark. Does DuraLark, is it capable of pulling reports such as history reports?
Absolutely. What we do is we actually set up a system that goes through and finds the errors and remediates those errors, so that in the process of the remediation it tracks and maintains who does what to the record, because it may be one record that needs to be modified or changed that can impact 100 errors. So when you fix one, it fixes 100, which means that, you know, you can really prioritize how you remediate the solution. Tracking that, building histories off that, very important. If there was an audit, then the auditor would be able to come in and see where you started and where you are based on what they have found. They can see improvement. That's pretty impressive because it's very rarely done. So yes, we do a really important job with logging and being able to generate reports.
Great, thank you, Carl. And I think we have time for just one more. I currently have firewalls technically, but I don't think we get enough reports that are meaningful. What should I do to get started?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the things you want to do is make sure you look at our contact information. I'm actually going to bounce back one slide in our deck here, so that if I can, let me see if it will. There you go. I'll keep that up for just a moment in case anybody wanted to take down these contacts. you can either contact myself or Carl, and we can definitely help you get started. That's what I talked about early on with, you may have firewalls, but if you don't know how effective they're being or what the health of those devices are, then it's time to look for a vendor like Neturian who does this. We do it for thousands upon thousands of customers, and we can definitely make sure that you're getting the value out of that investment. This should be something that, it's sort of like insurance. You pay for it, you know it's there, but it doesn't bother you. And you should only have to worry about it if there truly is something that rises to the top that you've got to be aware of. And so we could definitely talk to whoever has that question. You can reach out to us after the event, or you'll probably be hearing from either Carl or myself or both of us via follow-up communication. And if you have that question, just definitely sit down with us and talk through us exactly what your concerns are, and we'll see if we can help you out.
Hey, John, can I add something to that, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. At DualArc, what we've done and where we came from is my background is with Checkpoint. And Checkpoint software is really where the firewalls originally were invented. And firewalls today are almost a commodity. But if you look back to what they were originally purposed for, it was to really look at the information that was traversing the through the internet. What we've done, in essence, at DualArc is build a firewall around the data. So not only do we firewall or understand the firewalls on the network, so we can help you with that, we also understand how to firewall the data. And that's kind of a two-play type environment for the folks that work with DualArc. It's a very nice value. Thanks, John. Thanks, David.
You bet.
All right, well, thank you to everyone for submitting all of your questions, and thank you again to John and Carl for all the insight today. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future.